The smell of lilies and grief still clung to my black dress as I fumbled with my keys outside Dad's house, my hands shaking from exhaustion and 3 sleepless nights. The funeral had been beautiful, everything Dad would have wanted, but now came the hardest part. Going through his belongings and deciding what to keep, what to donate, and what would help me remember the man who taught me everything about resilience and love. You're about to hear an unbelievable true story, so please like and subscribe. Drop your location in the comments. My name is Margaret Anderson, I'm 63 years old, and I never imagined that saying goodbye to my father would lead to the biggest family betrayal of my life. As I pushed open Dad's front door, expecting the familiar silence of his empty house, I heard something that made my blood run cold. The sound of items being tossed into trash bags, coming from his bedroom upstairs. "Hello?" I called out, my voice echoing through the hallway lined with Dad's military photos and family pictures. "Is someone there?" The rustling stopped abruptly, followed by hurried footsteps. My mother-in-law, Patricia Wells, appeared at the top of the stairs. Her silver hair perfectly styled, despite the fact that she should have still been at the funeral reception. She was carrying 2 large garbage bags, and her face went pale when she saw me standing there. "Margaret, I didn't expect you back so soon," Patricia stammered, gripping the bags tighter. "I thought you'd be at the church for hours." "What are you doing here, Patricia? And what's in those bags?" My voice was steady, but my heart was pounding. Something was very wrong about this entire situation. "Oh, these old things?" She glanced down at the bags as if she'd forgotten she was holding them. "I was just helping you get started with the cleanup. You know how overwhelming these situations can be, dear. I thought I'd take care of the obvious trash so you wouldn't have to deal with it." I walked slowly up the stairs, my mind racing. Patricia had always been controlling, always inserting herself into family situations where she didn't belong, but this felt different. This felt calculated. "Patricia, I specifically told everyone at the funeral that I wanted to go through Dad's belongings myself. These aren't your decisions to make." "Now, Margaret, don't be dramatic. It's just old clothes and papers. Nothing important." But her defensive tone and the way she was backing toward the bedroom told me she was lying. I pushed past her into Dad's bedroom, and what I saw there made me gasp. Dresser drawers were pulled open and emptied. His closet had been ransacked, and there were several more garbage bags sitting by the window. On his nightstand, I noticed something that made my stomach drop. The empty spot where Dad's wooden jewelry box used to sit. The one that held his wedding ring, his purple heart medal, and the silver watch that belonged to his father. "Where's Dad's jewelry box, Patricia?" She shifted uncomfortably, still clutching those bags. "What jewelry box? I haven't seen any jewelry box." "The wooden one that's been on his nightstand for 20 years. The one with his most precious belongings?" My voice was rising now, and I could feel 30 years of buried resentment toward this woman bubbling to the surface. Just then, I heard my husband Kevin's voice from downstairs. "Mom? Margaret? What's going on? Your cars are both here, but no one answered the door." "We're up here, honey," I called back, never taking my eyes off Patricia. Kevin Anderson, my husband of 34 years, had always been caught in the middle between his mother's manipulative behavior and my attempts to set reasonable boundaries. He appeared in the doorway moments later, his face flushed from rushing over from the church. "What's happening?" "Mom, why do you have garbage bags?" Kevin looked between us with growing concern. "Your mother has been going through my father's belongings without permission, and now his jewelry box is missing." I watched Kevin's face carefully, hoping he would finally see what I'd been trying to tell him about his mother for years. Patricia immediately launched into damage control mode. Kevin, sweetheart, you know how emotional your wife gets. I was simply trying to help by removing some obvious trash. I haven't taken anything that doesn't belong to me. Then you won't mind if we look through those bags, I said firmly. The look that flashed across Patricia's face, panic mixed with anger, told me everything I needed to know. But before she could respond, another voice joined our tense conversation. Margaret, I brought your purse from the church. You left it. Oh my. My best friend and neighbor of 15 years, Dorothy Chen, stood in the doorway holding my black handbag. Dorothy had been Dad's neighbor too, living just 2 doors down from his house, and she'd helped me coordinate many of his care needs over the past year. Her presence here felt like a lifeline. Dorothy, thank goodness you're here. Patricia has been throwing away Dad's belongings, and his jewelry box is missing. Dorothy's eyes widened as she took in the scene. The ransacked room, Patricia clutching garbage bags, and the obvious tension crackling between all of us. The wooden jewelry box with his medals. Margaret, I saw your father showing those Purple Heart medals to my grandson just last week. He was so proud of them. Those medals should be mine now, I said, my voice breaking slightly. Along with his wedding ring and his father's watch. They're family heirlooms, and Patricia knows exactly how much they mean to me. Kevin ran his hands through his graying hair, looking overwhelmed. Mom, please just tell us what's in the bags. If there's nothing wrong, then there's nothing to hide. But Patricia's expression had hardened into the stubborn, defensive look I knew so well. I don't appreciate being treated like a criminal in front of strangers. Dorothy, this is a private family matter. Dorothy isn't a stranger. She's been part of Dad's life for 15 years, I snapped. And she has every right to be here because, unlike you, she actually cared about my father. That's when Patricia made a mistake that revealed everything. Your father had too much junk anyway. Half of this stuff should have been thrown out years ago. I was doing you a favor. The casual cruelty in her voice, the complete dismissal of Dad's life and belongings, made something inside me snap. These weren't just objects to me. They were the tangible pieces of my father's story, his service to our country, his love for my mother, his connection to his own father. And Patricia was treating them like garbage. One small detail blew the whole thing open. The words hung in the air like a slap. Your father had too much junk anyway. I stared at Patricia, feeling something cold and hard settle in my chest. This woman had just dismissed my father's entire life as junk on the day we buried him. Dorothy, I said quietly, never taking my eyes off Patricia. Would you mind helping me look through these bags? Dorothy immediately moved toward the nearest garbage bag, but Patricia stepped in front of it, her face flushed with indignation. Absolutely not. I won't be subjected to this humiliation. Then empty them yourself and show us what you've taken, Kevin said, his voice carrying a firmness I rarely heard him use with his mother. Because right now, this looks really bad, Mom. I watched Patricia's internal struggle play out across her face. She was trapped, and she knew it. The longer she refused, the more guilty she appeared. But I also knew Patricia well enough to recognize that cornered, desperate look in her eyes. She was calculating, trying to figure out her next move. Fine, she said finally, her voice tight with barely controlled anger. But I want it on record that I find this treatment absolutely disgraceful. She upended the first bag with more force than necessary, spilling its contents across Dad's bedroom floor. At first glance, it looked like she'd been telling the truth. Old magazines, expired medications, worn-out clothing that should have been donated years ago. My heart sank slightly. Maybe I had been wrong. But then Dorothy knelt down and started examining the items more carefully. Margaret, look at this. She held up what appeared to be an old, faded shirt. This is your father's Navy shirt from his service days. Look at the name tape. She was right. I could just make out Harrison stitched in faded letters above the chest pocket. It wasn't in good condition, but it was far from trash. It was a piece of his history, something I would have treasured. And this, Dorothy continued, pulling out a small, tarnished frame. Inside was a photo of my parents on their wedding day, the glass cracked, but the image still visible. This was on his nightstand, Margaret. I saw it there just last week when I brought him soup. My throat tightened as I looked at the photo. My parents looked so young, so hopeful. Mom's dress was simple but elegant, Dad in his dress uniform. This picture had sat beside his bed every single night for the past 3 years since I'd moved him to this house. He'd told me once that it was the last thing he saw before falling asleep, and the first thing he saw when he woke up. Patricia, I said, my voice shaking. This isn't trash. None of this is trash. It's old and broken, she replied defensively. That frame is falling apart and that shirt has holes in it. That's not the point. Kevin picked up the wedding photo, handling it gently. Mom, this meant something to him. These things all meant something to him. I could see Kevin wrestling with his own emotions as he looked at the photo. Despite Patricia's influence over the years, he had genuinely liked my father. They'd bonded over baseball and old war movies. Kevin understood the significance of these items even if his mother refused to. What's in the other bag? I asked, dreading the answer. Patricia's hesitation told me everything. She clutched the second bag tighter against her chest, and I saw her knuckles go white. Just more of the same. Clutter and broken things. Then you won't mind showing us, Dorothy said firmly. I was grateful for her steady presence. Having a witness, someone outside the family drama but who genuinely cared about Dad, was forcing Patricia to be more careful with her lies. I most certainly do mind. This is harassment. But Kevin had apparently reached his limit. He stepped toward his mother with a look I'd never seen before. Disappointed, embarrassed, and determined, all at once. Mom, give me the bag. Kevin Michael, I am your mother, and I will not be treated this way. And Margaret just lost her father today, Kevin replied, his voice steady but strained. Just lost him today, Mom. She buried him 2 hours ago, and she came home to find you going through his things without permission. So yes, you're my mother, and I love you, but right now, you're going to give me that bag. I felt a surge of gratitude toward Kevin, for all the times he'd stayed silent during Patricia's comments about Dad, for all the family gatherings where he'd failed to defend my father's place in our lives. He was finally stepping up when it mattered most. Patricia looked between the three of us. Kevin's determined face, Dorothy's steady presence, and my tear-filled but resolute expression. She was outnumbered, and she knew it. With a sound of disgust, she thrust the bag at Kevin. Fine. But when this is over, I expect an apology from all of you. Kevin opened the bag and immediately went pale. Oh, Mom. Oh, no. What did you do? He reached in and pulled out Dad's jewelry box, the wooden box with the carved eagle on top that had sat on Dad's dresser for as long as I could remember. But it wasn't just the box. Kevin kept pulling items out. Dad's Purple Heart medal, his bronze star, his wedding ring still in its small velvet pouch, and his father's pocket watch that had been passed down through 3 generations. The sight of those precious items mixed in with what Patricia had dismissed as trash hit me like a physical blow. These weren't just valuable objects. They represented everything Dad had been proud of, everything he'd wanted me to have. His military service, his marriage to Mom, his connection to his own father's memory. You were stealing from him, I whispered, the words barely audible. On the day of his funeral, you were stealing his most precious possessions. Patricia's face had gone from defiant to desperate. I wasn't stealing. I was going to give them to you later. I was just keeping them safe. Safe? Dorothy's voice cut through the room like a blade. Safe in a garbage bag? Margaret, I watched your father polish that watch every Sunday morning. He told me at least a dozen times that it would be yours someday, that it was the most important thing he owned besides his medals. The betrayal was overwhelming. Not just the attempted theft, but the casual cruelty of it. Patricia hadn't just tried to take these things. She'd been willing to throw them away, to treat Dad's legacy like literal garbage. And she'd planned to do it while I was at his funeral, while I was saying goodbye to the man who'd raised me, loved me, and trusted me to preserve his memory. But as I stood there holding Dad's purple heart, feeling its weight in my palm, I realized this moment was about to reveal something even worse than what I'd already discovered. Kevin was still rifling through the bag when he stopped suddenly, his face draining of color. Mom, where's the rest? What do you mean, the rest? Patricia's voice had taken on a shrill quality that made my stomach clench with dread. Dad's Bronze Star certificate, his discharge papers, the letter from his commanding officer. Kevin's hands were shaking now as he searched deeper in the bag. Mom, these aren't here. The room went deadly quiet. I watched Patricia's face, saw the exact moment she realized she'd been caught in something far worse than what we'd already uncovered. Her eyes darted toward the door, then back to Kevin, then to me, like a trapped animal looking for an escape route. I don't know what you're talking about, she said, but her voice cracked on the words. Mom. Kevin's voice was barely above a whisper. What did you already throw away? The question hung in the air between us like a loaded gun. I felt my knees go weak as the implications hit me. If Patricia had these precious items in a bag, ready to dispose of them, what had she already gotten rid of? What pieces of Dad's life, of his history, of my inheritance, had already made their way to some dumpster while I was sitting in that funeral home, listening to people share memories of the man she was systematically erasing? There might have been some papers. Patricia's voice was getting smaller with each word. But they were just old documents, yellow and brittle. I thought they were worthless. Worthless? The word exploded out of me with such force that all three of them stepped back. Those papers documented his service to our country. They were proof of his sacrifice, his honor. They were going to go in the shadow box with his medals. I had planned that shadow box for years. Dad and I had talked about it, how someday when he was gone, I would create a proper memorial display with his medals, his commendations, his service photographs. He'd been so proud of his military record, so careful to preserve every document, every letter of recognition. And Patricia had thrown it away like junk mail. Dorothy moved closer to me, and I could feel her steady presence anchoring me as my world tilted sideways. Where did you throw them away, Patricia? The garbage truck came this morning, before the funeral. The words hit me like a physical blow. While I had been getting dressed in my black suit, while I had been steeling myself for the hardest day of my life, Patricia had been systematically destroying the tangible pieces of Dad's legacy. The garbage truck had come and gone, taking with it irreplaceable documents that told the story of who my father had been before I was even born. Kevin sank into Dad's old armchair, the bag of rescued items clutched in his lap. "Mom, how could you do this? On today of all days?" "I was trying to help," Patricia said, but there was no conviction left in her voice. "The house has to be cleaned out. Someone had to make the hard decisions." "The hard decisions?" I could hear my voice rising, could feel years of suppressed frustration and grief pouring out. "The hard decision was mine to make. This is my father's house, my father's life, my inheritance. You had no right." But even as I said the words, I realized something that made my blood run cold. Patricia hadn't been acting impulsively. She hadn't just decided this morning to help with cleaning. She'd been too organized, too systematic. She'd known exactly which items to target, exactly which bags to pack. "How long have you been doing this?" I asked quietly. The question seemed to surprise everyone, including Patricia herself. She opened her mouth, then closed it, then opened it again. "How long, Patricia?" Dorothy repeated, her social worker instincts clearly picking up on the same thread I'd started pulling. "I don't know what you mean." But Kevin was staring at his mother with dawning horror. "The things Dad kept asking me about, the photos he couldn't find, his old address book." He looked at me, his face pale. "Margaret, for the past few months, Dad kept calling me, asking if I'd seen things, small things. I thought he was just getting forgetful." The room seemed to spin around me. Dad hadn't been getting forgetful. Dad had been getting robbed, systematically and slowly, by the woman who'd smiled at him during family dinners and called him dear while she was stealing pieces of his life. "You've been taking his things for months?" I said, and it wasn't a question. Patricia's silence was answer enough, but as the full scope of her betrayal began to sink in, I heard the sound of a car pulling into the driveway. Through the window, I could see it was Patricia's sedan, which meant someone had driven it here. Someone who might have been helping her all along. The front door opened before any of us could move, and Patricia's husband walked in carrying 2 large garbage bags. He stopped short when he saw all of us standing there, his face immediately flushing red. "Oh," he said, looking between Patricia and the rest of us. "I thought you'd still be at the service." Kevin stood up slowly from Dad's armchair, the bag of rescued belongings still in his hands. "Dad?" "What are you doing here?" I watched the silent communication pass between Patricia and her husband, the kind of wordless exchange that comes from decades of marriage. He set the garbage bags down by the door, and I could see they were full. "Your mother asked me to help," he said quietly, unable to meet anyone's eyes. "She said the family needed help clearing things out." "Help clearing things out," Dorothy repeated, her voice flat, while Margaret was burying her father. The weight of it settled on me like a crushing blow. This hadn't been Patricia acting alone in some misguided attempt to help. This had been planned, coordinated, timed specifically for when I would be at the cemetery saying goodbye to Dad. They had used my grief as cover for their theft. "How much did you take?" I asked, looking at those bags by the door, thinking about the garbage truck that had already come and gone, thinking about months of Dad's confusion about his missing belongings. Patricia's husband shifted uncomfortably. "Patricia said you'd asked us to help. She said you were overwhelmed and needed someone to make the hard choices." "I never asked you to do anything," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "I never asked either of you to touch a single thing in this house." Kevin walked over to the bags his father had just brought in. "What's in these?" "Don't," Patricia said quickly, but Kevin was already opening the first bag. He pulled out Dad's old leather jacket, the one he'd worn to every one of my school plays. Under that was a shoebox, and when Kevin opened it, dozens of loose photographs scattered across the floor. Pictures of Dad as a young man, pictures of my mother, pictures of me as a baby. "These were in his bedroom closet," Kevin said, his voice hollow with disbelief. "You were going through his bedroom." I knelt down and started gathering the scattered photographs, my hands shaking. Here was Dad on his wedding day, looking so young and happy. Here was one of him holding me when I was maybe 2 years old, both of us laughing at something outside the frame. Here was my mother in her garden, pregnant with me, Dad's hand on her swollen belly. "These aren't things to be thrown away," I said, clutching a photo of Dad teaching me to ride a bike. "These are memories. These are the story of his life, of our family." Dorothy knelt beside me, helping to gather the photos. "Margaret, we need to go through everything they took, all of it." Patricia's husband looked stricken as he watched me collecting the photographs. "Patricia, you said these were just old papers and junk. You said Margaret wanted us to clear out the clutter." "I was trying to help," Patricia repeated, but now she sounded desperate rather than defensive. "The house is so full of stuff. I thought if we could just get rid of the unnecessary things." "Unnecessary?" I stood up, holding the photo of Dad teaching me to ride a bike. "You think my family's history is unnecessary?" Kevin was going through the second bag now, pulling out Dad's old tools, a wooden box that I recognized as containing Dad's military medals, and a small notebook that I'd never seen before. He opened the notebook, and his expression changed. "Margaret," he said softly, "you need to see this." He handed me the notebook, and I realized it was a journal of sorts. The first entry was dated 6 months ago, and Dad's familiar handwriting made my throat tighten. But as I read, my sadness transformed into something much angrier. "Can't find the photo album from Margaret's high school graduation. I know I put it in the den bookshelf. Patricia said she'd help me look for it, but we never did find it." I flipped the page. "The box with Helen's jewelry is missing from my bedroom dresser. Asked Patricia if she'd seen it when she was helping me organize last week. She suggested maybe I'd moved it and forgotten. Starting to worry about my memory." Page after page of Dad's growing confusion and self-doubt, documenting things that went missing after Patricia's visits. His increasing worry that he was losing his mind. His gratitude for Patricia's help, even as she was systematically gaslighting him into believing he was becoming forgetful. My hands were trembling as I read the final entry, dated just 2 weeks before Dad's death. "Margaret's baby pictures are gone from the photo box. I've looked everywhere. Patricia says I'm being too hard on myself, that it's normal to misplace things at my age, but I know I didn't misplace them. I know I didn't." I looked up at Patricia, and for the first time in 20 years of knowing this woman, I saw her exactly as she was. "You made him think he was losing his mind?" I said. "You made my father spend his final months thinking he had dementia because you were stealing from him." The silence that followed was deafening. Even Patricia seemed to realize that there was no explanation, no justification that could make this right. But as I stood there holding Dad's journal, documenting his confusion and fear, I heard footsteps on the front porch. Heavy footsteps that didn't belong to any of us. Kevin looked toward the door, his face puzzled. "Were you expecting someone else?" Before anyone could answer, there was a firm knock on the door. The knock came again, more insistent this time. I clutched Dad's journal tighter, my heart racing from both the revelations I'd just read and the unexpected interruption. "I'll get it," Kevin said, but I held up my hand. "No." I looked directly at Patricia, whose face had gone pale. "You answer it, since you seem to know your way around this house so well." Patricia's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. The confident woman who'd been disposing of my father's belongings just an hour ago had completely disappeared, replaced by someone who looked cornered and desperate. "I don't know who that could be," she stammered. "Then go find out," I said firmly. She walked toward the door on unsteady legs, and we followed. Through the frosted glass, I could see a tall silhouette. Patricia's hand hesitated on the doorknob. "Open it," Kevin said quietly. When Patricia finally opened the door, I was shocked to see my elderly neighbor, Mr. Chen, standing on the porch holding a cardboard box. "Oh," he said, looking surprised to see Patricia. "I was expecting Margaret. I saw the cars and figured she might be here going through things." His kind eyes found mine over Patricia's shoulder. "Margaret, dear, I'm so sorry for your loss. Your father was a good man." "Thank you, Mr. Chen," I managed. "What can I do for you?" He shifted the box in his arms. "Well, this is a bit awkward, but your father asked me to hold on to some things for safekeeping a few months ago. Said he was worried about misplacing them, and he trusted me to keep them safe until you could come get them." The blood drained from Patricia's face completely. "He was quite concerned," Mr. Chen continued, oblivious to the tension crackling in the room. "Said some of his most precious belongings kept going missing, and he couldn't understand what was happening to them." Poor man was so worried he was losing his mind. Kevin stepped forward. "What kind of things, Mr. Chen?" "Oh, family photos mostly. Some of your mother's jewelry, Margaret. A photo album from your high school graduation that he treasured. Your baby pictures. Things that meant the world to him." Mr. Chen's weathered face crinkled with concern. "He made me promise to give them directly to you after the funeral. Said he didn't trust his own memory anymore, but he trusted me to remember." I felt like I might collapse. Dad had known. Somehow, he'd figured out what was happening and had saved the most important things. Even while doubting himself, even while being convinced he was losing his mind, he'd found a way to protect what mattered most. "He was sharp as a tack when he brought these over," Mr. Chen added. "Kept apologizing for bothering me, but I told him it was no bother at all. Neighbors help neighbors." I took the box from him with trembling hands. "Thank you. You have no idea what this means to me." "He also gave me this," Mr. Chen said, pulling an envelope from his jacket pocket. "Said to give it to you when I brought the box." My name was written on the envelope in Dad's careful handwriting. Inside, I found a short note dated 3 months ago. "Margaret, if you're reading this, then something has happened to me, and Mr. Chen has done what I asked. I don't know what's been happening to our family's things, but I had to make sure these made it to you. Don't blame yourself if other things went missing. I know you'll understand. Take care of yourself, sweetheart. Love, Dad." The letter shook in my hands as I finished reading it aloud. When I looked up, Mr. Chen was studying Patricia with the expression I'd never seen on his gentle face. "Funny thing," he said slowly. "Your father mentioned that his daughter-in-law had been helping him organize. Said she was very thorough." Patricia finally found her voice. "I was just trying to help an old man who was getting confused." "Is that so?" Mr. Chen's tone remained polite, but there was steel underneath it. "Because when I helped your father load these things into the box, his mind seemed crystal clear to me. Crystal clear." The silence that followed Mr. Chen's words felt thick enough to cut. I clutched the box against my chest, feeling the weight of Dad's foresight and love, while Patricia stood frozen like a deer caught in headlights. The afternoon sun streaming through the living room windows seemed to illuminate every dust mote floating in the air, every line of guilt etched across my mother-in-law's pale face. Kevin moved closer to me, his presence solid and reassuring. I could feel the tension radiating from his body as he processed what Mr. Chen had revealed. The neighbor's words hung in the air, like an accusation that didn't need to be spoken aloud. "Well?" Mr. Chen said, adjusting his jacket with the same methodical care he used when tending his prize-winning roses. "I should let you folks have your privacy. Margaret, your father was a good man. He spoke about you constantly. How proud he was of the woman you'd become. How much you meant to him." His eyes flicked briefly to Patricia before returning to mine. "He wanted to make sure you knew that, even at the end." After Mr. Chen left, the three of us stood in the living room like actors who'd forgotten their lines. The box in my arms felt warm, as if it still carried some essence of Dad's protective love. Patricia had sunk into the armchair by the window, her usual commanding presence deflated like a punctured balloon. Kevin broke the silence first, his voice carefully controlled. "Mom, we need to talk about this." "What's there to talk about?" Patricia's words came out sharp, but I could hear the tremor underneath. An old man was getting confused, losing things. I was trying to help organize before things got completely out of hand. I set the box down on the coffee table with deliberate care, my hands still shaking slightly. "Dad wasn't confused, Patricia. Mr. Chen made that very clear. And this letter?" I held up the envelope, Dad's handwriting visible to all of us. He knew exactly what was happening. The words felt strange in my mouth, this new boldness that grief and revelation had somehow unlocked. For years, I'd bitten my tongue during Patricia's subtle criticisms and backhanded comments. I'd smoothed over conflicts and made excuses, all in the name of keeping peace. But standing in my father's living room, holding proof of his lucid awareness, something fundamental had shifted inside me. Kevin ran his hands through his hair, a gesture I recognized from our early dating days when he was working up courage to confront difficult situations. "Mom, if Dad gave these things to Mr. Chen months ago, that means—" He paused, the implications sinking in. "That means he knew someone was taking his belongings, and he felt he couldn't trust them to stay safe in his own home." Patricia's composure finally cracked. "You don't understand how overwhelming it was, watching him live in that cluttered house, surrounded by all that old junk. Every surface covered with newspapers from 1987, drawers stuffed with rubber bands and twist ties. Someone had to make decisions about what was worth keeping." "But those weren't your decisions to make," I said, surprised by the steadiness in my own voice. "Those weren't your memories, your connections, your father's wishes." The afternoon light had shifted, casting longer shadows across the room. I could see dust particles dancing in the golden beams, and I thought about all the hours Dad had spent in this very spot, probably watching those same dust motes while worrying about his disappearing treasures. The image made my chest tighten with a mixture of love and protective anger. Kevin moved to stand behind Patricia's chair, placing his hands on her shoulders in a gesture that managed to be both supportive and confrontational. "Mom, Margaret spent every weekend here for the past 2 years. She was helping Dad organize things at his pace in a way that respected his feelings about his belongings." "His pace?" Patricia laughed, but it sounded hollow. "At his pace, nothing would have ever been dealt with. The man kept every Christmas card he'd ever received, every school paper you ever brought home. It was getting ridiculous." I felt something hot and protective flare in my chest. Those Christmas cards included ones I made for him in elementary school. Those school papers were Kevin's report cards and drawings. They were pieces of our family history, not garbage to be sorted through and discarded. Opening the box Mr. Chen had brought, I carefully lifted out a photo album I remembered from childhood visits. The burgundy leather cover was worn smooth from years of handling, and when I opened it, I found myself looking at pictures I hadn't seen in decades. There was Kevin at age 5, grinning with a missing front tooth. My own high school graduation photo, the one Dad had insisted on having enlarged and framed. A picture of Kevin and me on our wedding day, Dad beaming between us in his carefully pressed suit. "Look at this," I said, holding up the album so both Kevin and Patricia could see. "This is what you called junk. These are the things Dad saved because they mattered to him." Kevin leaned forward, his face softening as he saw the carefully preserved memories. "I remember that day," he said, pointing to a photo of himself and his grandfather building a birdhouse in the backyard. "Dad kept that birdhouse until the day he died. It was falling apart, but he wouldn't let me fix it because he said it was perfect the way Grandpa had helped him make it." Patricia was quiet now, watching us page through the album. I could see something shifting in her expression, a crack in the armor of certainty she'd worn all afternoon. "There's something else," I said, reaching deeper into the box. My fingers found a small jewelry case, and when I opened it, I gasped. Inside was my mother's wedding ring, the simple gold band she'd worn for 35 years before cancer took her. Beside it lay a pair of pearl earrings I remembered her wearing to church every Sunday. "He saved Mom's jewelry," Kevin whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "I thought it was all lost when we couldn't find it after her funeral." Patricia's face had gone very pale. I didn't realize." "You didn't realize what?" The question came out harder than I'd intended, months of swallowed frustration finally finding its voice. "You didn't realize that a widower might want to keep his deceased wife's jewelry? You didn't realize that family photos might have sentimental value? Or you didn't realize that it wasn't your place to decide what had meaning and what didn't?" The room fell silent again, but this silence felt different, heavier, more consequential. Outside, I could hear the distant sound of Mr. Chen's lawnmower starting up, the normal rhythm of a Saturday afternoon continuing while our family reckoned with this moment of truth. Kevin sank down onto the couch beside me, close enough that I could feel the warmth of his presence. "Mom, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me." Patricia looked up at him, and for the first time since I'd known her, she looked genuinely frightened. "How long has this been going on? How many of Dad's things have you thrown away?" The question hung in the air between us, and I watched Patricia's composure finally begin to crumble. Her hands trembled slightly as she smoothed her skirt, a nervous gesture I'd never seen from her before. "Kevin, she started, then stopped, looking down at her lap. I felt something cold settle in my stomach, the way she couldn't meet his eyes, the way her usual confidence had evaporated. It told me everything I needed to know before she even spoke. "There were other times," she admitted quietly. "Not much, just things that seemed—" "What things?" Kevin's voice was steady, but I could hear the steel underneath. This was a side of my husband I rarely saw. The man who'd learned to stand firm when it mattered. Patricia glanced toward the kitchen, as if she could escape this conversation by simply looking away. "After your mother died, when your father was in the hospital for that week with pneumonia, I thought I was helping. The house was so cluttered, and I knew how hard it would be for him to keep up with everything." My heart started pounding. I remembered that week 2 years ago, how Dad had come home from the hospital seeming smaller somehow, more fragile, how he'd wandered around the house for days afterward with a lost expression. looking for things. "What did you throw away, Mom?" Kevin asked again, his patience clearly wearing thin. Some old books that were falling apart, a box of letters that looked like junk mail, some clothes that had holes in them. She was speaking faster now, the words tumbling out like a confession. "I kept anything that looked important. I kept the photo albums. I kept his important papers. But I was remembering more now. Dad asking me if I'd seen his copy of The Old Man and the Sea, the paperback that had been practically falling apart from how many times he'd read it. Him looking confused when he couldn't find the letters my mother had written him during their brief courtship. The way he'd stopped wearing his favorite cardigan, the one with the small hole near the pocket that Mom had always threatened to mend but never got around to. "Those weren't junk mail," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "Those were love letters." "And that book you threw away?" That was the first book my mother ever gave him. That's why he kept rereading it. Patricia's face went white. "I didn't know. How could I have known?" "You could have asked," Kevin said, and I heard his father's quiet strength in those words. "You could have asked him. You could have asked us." I pulled the photo album closer to my chest, thinking about all the other things that might be gone forever. Dad's gentle confusion during those last 2 years suddenly made more sense. It wasn't just grief or age. It was the slow disappearance of the physical reminders of his life, his love, his history. "I was trying to help," Patricia said again, but the words sounded hollow now, even to her. "No," I said, finally finding my voice. "You were trying to control. There's a difference." Kevin reached over and took my hand, and I felt some of my anger transform into something else. Not forgiveness, exactly, but a kind of clarity. This wasn't just about today. This wasn't just about a grieving daughter-in-law and an overstepping mother-in-law. This was about Patricia's need to manage everything and everyone around her. Her inability to sit with other people's messiness or pain. "I loved your father," Patricia said, looking directly at Kevin now. "You have to believe that." "I do believe that," Kevin replied. "But love isn't the same as respect, Mom. And you didn't respect him enough to let him decide what mattered to him." I watched Patricia absorb this, saw the impact of her son's words hit home in a way that all my anger hadn't been able to achieve. "What do I do now?" she asked, and for the first time since I'd known her, Patricia sounded genuinely lost. "How do I fix this?" Kevin and I exchanged glances. It was a fair question, but I wasn't sure there was an answer. Some things, once thrown away, couldn't be retrieved. Some damage couldn't be undone. But as I sat there holding the rescued photo album, I realized there was something else I needed to know. Something that might determine whether our family could move forward from this, or whether this moment would break us apart permanently. "Patricia," I said, my voice steadier now, "I need you to tell me the truth about something else." She looked at me warily. "Today wasn't the first time you've gone through Dad's things while we weren't there, was it?" The silence that followed my question stretched on for what felt like minutes. Patricia's hands fidgeted with the hem of her sweater, and I could see the internal battle playing out across her face. Kevin squeezed my hand tighter, and I knew he was thinking the same thing I was, that this moment would determine everything that came next. "Answer her, Mom," Kevin said quietly. "Please." Patricia closed her eyes for a long moment. When she opened them again, they were filled with tears. "No," she said. It wasn't the first time. The admission hit me like a physical blow. I had suspected, but hearing it confirmed made my chest tight with a mixture of betrayal and vindication. How many times? I asked. I don't know. Several. Over the past year, maybe longer. Patricia's voice was barely audible. When you were at work, or running errands, or when Kevin was traveling, your father would be napping, and I couldn't stand seeing him surrounded by all that clutter. I thought I was making his life easier. Kevin stood up abruptly and walked to the window, his back to both of us. I could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his hands clenched and unclenched at his sides. What else did you throw away? I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know the answer. Patricia took a shaky breath. Old newspapers, magazines from the 1980s, clothes that didn't fit him anymore. That stack of sheet music from when your mother played piano, it was all yellowed, and some of the pages were torn. Oh, God, I whispered. My mother's sheet music. Dad used to flip through it sometimes, humming the melodies she used to play. I had been meaning to ask him about learning some of those songs, thinking maybe I could take piano lessons as a way to connect with both of them. There were recipes, too, Patricia continued, as if the confession was spilling out of her now that the dam had broken. Handwritten cards with recipes. They were stained and hard to read, so I assumed they were duplicates of things you already had. My grandmother's recipes. My mother's modifications in the margins. The cookie recipe that never turned out quite right when I made it from memory because I was missing some crucial note my mother had written on the original card. Kevin turned back toward us, his face pale. Mom, do you understand what you've done? Do you understand that you've been systematically erasing his history? Our family's history? I thought I was helping, Patricia repeated, but even she seemed to realize how inadequate those words were. You thought wrong, Kevin said, and there was an edge to his voice I'd rarely heard before. You made decisions that weren't yours to make about things that didn't belong to you. I sat there processing the magnitude of what had been lost, trying to calculate how many afternoons I had spent looking for something of my parents that Patricia had probably thrown away months ago. How many times had I asked Dad about a particular item, only to see that confused look cross his face as he tried to remember what had happened to it? He knew, I said suddenly, the realization hitting me all at once. He knew things were disappearing, didn't he? That's why he seemed so anxious sometimes. That's why he started keeping things in his bedroom instead of around the house. Patricia nodded miserably. He mentioned a few times that he couldn't find certain things. But I thought he was just forgetting because of his age. So you let him think he was losing his memory instead of admitting what you had done, Kevin said, and I could hear the disappointment in his voice. You let him doubt himself rather than tell him the truth. The cruelty of it was breathtaking. Dad, in his last years, thinking his mind was failing him more than it actually was, questioning his own memories and perceptions, while Patricia continued her campaign of helpful tidying. I need some air, I said, standing up abruptly. The weight of everything, the funeral, the discovery, this conversation, was pressing down on me like a physical force. I'll come with you, Kevin offered, but I shook my head. I need a few minutes alone, please. I walked out to the back porch, the same porch where Dad and I had sat just a few weeks ago, talking about Mom's garden and whether we should try to replant it next spring. The evening air was cool against my face, and I could hear the familiar sounds of the neighborhood settling into darkness. Behind me, I could hear Kevin and Patricia talking in low, tense voices. I couldn't make out the words, but I could hear the strain in both their voices, the weight of this revelation affecting their relationship too. I thought about forgiveness, about family, about the difference between intent and impact. Patricia had meant well. I believed that. But meaning well wasn't enough when the result was the systematic destruction of irreplaceable memories and the erosion of an elderly man's confidence in his own mind. The back door opened, and Kevin stepped out onto the porch. "How are you doing?" he asked, settling into the chair next to mine. "I don't know," I said honestly. "I keep thinking about all the things that are just gone forever, and I keep thinking about Dad, wondering if things were missing, feeling like he couldn't trust his own memory." Kevin was quiet for a moment. "She wants to know if there's a way to make this right. She's talking about buying replacements, about trying to recreate what was lost." I almost laughed, but there was no humor in it. How do you replace a love letter? How do you recreate a recipe card with my grandmother's handwriting and my mother's notes? You can't, Kevin said simply, and I think she's starting to understand that. We sat in comfortable silence for a while, both of us processing the events of this impossible day. Finally, Kevin spoke again. "What do you want to do? About her, I mean. About us, going forward?" It was a fair question, and one I wasn't sure I could answer yet. The betrayal felt enormous, but Patricia was still Kevin's mother. She was still family, and despite everything, I could see that she was genuinely devastated by the consequences of her actions. "I don't know if I can trust her again," I said eventually. "At least not the same way." "I understand that, and honestly, I'm not sure I can either." We were interrupted by the sound of the back door opening again. Patricia appeared, looking hesitant and smaller somehow than she had earlier. "I'm sorry to interrupt," she said, "but there's something else I need to tell you both. Something I should have mentioned earlier." Kevin and I exchanged glances. After everything we had already learned today, I wasn't sure I could handle another revelation. "What is it, Mom?" Kevin asked. Patricia took a deep breath, and I could see her gathering courage for whatever she was about to say. "The house," she said. "Your father's house. I may have already started making arrangements about that too." My stomach dropped. Kevin's jaw tightened, and I watched his hands grip the arms of his chair. "What kind of arrangements?" Kevin's voice was dangerously quiet. Patricia fidgeted with her purse strap, avoiding our eyes. "Well, I thought, since your father is gone and the house is so big and there's so much maintenance, I called a real estate agent just to get an assessment, to see what it might be worth." "You what?" I stood up so quickly my chair rocked backward. "Patricia, that house doesn't belong to you. It's part of Dad's estate. There are legal processes, probate, decisions that need to be made by the executor." "I know that," she said defensively. "I wasn't trying to sell it behind anyone's back. I just thought it would be helpful to have the information. You have so much on your plate right now, and I wanted to take care of the practical details." Kevin ran his hands through his hair, a gesture I recognized as his way of trying to maintain control when he was furious. "Mom, do you understand what you've done today? Do you see the pattern here?" "What pattern?" Patricia's voice rose slightly, and I caught a glimpse of the stubbornness that had probably driven her actions all along. "The pattern of making unilateral decisions about things that aren't yours to decide," I said, my voice shaking. "First throwing away Dad's belongings because you decided they were clutter. Then calling a real estate agent about his house because you decided it was too much maintenance. When exactly were you planning to involve me in decisions about my own father's estate?" Patricia's face flushed. "I was trying to help. You're grieving, you're overwhelmed, and someone needs to think practically about these things." "But that someone isn't you," Kevin said firmly. "That's what Margaret is trying to tell you, Mom. You don't get to decide what's practical for other people's lives." "So what was I supposed to do? Watch Margaret struggle with all of this alone?" You were supposed to ask, I said, sinking back into my chair. You were supposed to offer help, not take over. There's a difference between supporting someone and steamrolling over them. Patricia was quiet for a long moment, and I could see her processing this distinction, perhaps for the first time. The real estate agent, Kevin said. What exactly did you tell them? I scheduled them to come look at the house tomorrow afternoon, Patricia admitted. I thought we could at least know what we're dealing with financially. Cancel it, I said immediately. But Margaret, it might be good information to have. The housing market is… Cancel it, Kevin repeated, his tone brooking no argument. Today, call them back and cancel the appointment. Patricia looked between us, and I could see her struggling with the impulse to argue, to justify, to maintain control of the situation she'd created. I don't understand why you're both so upset about this, she said finally. I'm trying to be helpful. No, Mom, you're trying to be in charge, Kevin said. There's a difference, and it's a difference that's causing real harm. I thought about Dad's house, about the real estate agent who would have walked through those rooms tomorrow, assessing and appraising spaces that still held the echo of my father's presence. The violation felt almost as profound as discovering his belongings in the garbage. Patricia, I said, trying to keep my voice level. I need you to understand something. That house is the last place my father lived. It's where his coffee cup is still sitting on the kitchen counter, where his reading glasses are still on the nightstand. I'm not ready to think about selling it, and I may never be ready. But when I am ready to make that decision, it will be my decision to make. But the longer you wait, the more the property could deteriorate. There are pipes to worry about, and the roof, and… Those are my worries to have, I interrupted. My problems to solve, in my own time, in my own way. Patricia's mouth opened as if she wanted to argue further, but Kevin held up a hand. Mom, stop. Just stop talking and listen for a minute. His voice was gentler, but still firm. You've made 3 major overreaches today. The belongings, the house appraisal, and probably other things we haven't discovered yet. This isn't helping. This is controlling, and it's damaging your relationships with both of us. Other things? I asked, a new dread settling in my chest. Patricia, what else have you done? She looked genuinely surprised by the question. Nothing else. I mean, I don't think… Well, there was the matter of your father's mail. Kevin closed his eyes and took a deep breath. What about Dad's mail? I've been collecting it from his mailbox. I thought it would be easier if I sorted through it and handled the important things, rather than burdening Margaret with bills and advertisements, and… I felt something snap inside me. You've been taking his mail? Without telling me? I was going to give you the important pieces. I just wanted to filter out the unnecessary… That's mail fraud, Kevin said flatly. Mom, that's actually illegal. The color drained from Patricia's face. I didn't know. I was just trying to help, I finished. I know, but Patricia, you've now interfered with Dad's personal belongings, his property, and his mail. You've made me doubt every single thing I thought I knew about how he was living in his final months. And you've done it all without asking me, without consulting me, without even telling me until I caught you in the act. Patricia sank into a chair, looking suddenly fragile and lost. I don't know how to not help, she said quietly. When I see problems, I fix them. That's what I do. But these weren't your problems to fix, Kevin said gently. And by fixing them your way, you've created bigger problems for everyone else. We sat in heavy silence, the weight of the day's revelations settling over all of us. I looked at Patricia, seeing not just the woman who had violated my father's memory and my trust, but also someone who was genuinely bewildered by our reactions to what she saw as kindness. "The mail," I said finally. "Where is it?" Patricia hesitated. "At my house, in my office. I have it organized by type, and I was going to—" "I want all of it," I said. "Everything. Bills, advertisements, catalogs, credit card offers, everything." "Even the junk mail?" "There's so much of it, and it's really not—" "Everything," Kevin repeated firmly. Patricia nodded reluctantly. "All right, I'll get it for you." "Tonight," I added. "I want it tonight." As if on cue, Patricia's phone rang. She glanced at it and frowned. "It's the real estate agent," she said. "Calling to confirm tomorrow's appointment." I held out my hand. "Give me the phone." Patricia hesitated, clutching the phone as it continued to ring. "Margaret, I think we should discuss this first. The agent has already done so much work, and I've put down a deposit for the staging consultation." "The phone," I repeated, my voice steadier than I felt inside. My heart was pounding, but something had crystallized in my mind during this conversation. Every boundary that had been crossed, every decision that had been made without me, had led to this moment. My father's house was going to be sold without my knowledge or consent, just like his belongings had been thrown away without my input. The phone stopped ringing before Patricia could hand it over. She looked relieved. "You'll call them back," I said. "Right now, and you'll cancel whatever arrangements you've made." "But Margaret, the market conditions are perfect right now, and your father's house really does need significant work." "The foundation issues alone—" "Stop." The word came out sharper than I intended, but I was tired of being managed, tired of having my father's life interpreted and reorganized according to Patricia's standards. Just stop talking about what my father's house needs or doesn't need. I could feel years of frustration bubbling up, not just about today, but about every time Patricia had swooped in to fix problems I didn't know I had, every time she'd made decisions for the greater good without consulting the people those decisions affected most. The worst part was that I could see in her face that she genuinely believed she was helping. "Patricia," I said, trying to find words for feelings I'd never articulated before. "Do you remember when Kevin and Sarah first got engaged?" Patricia looked confused by the change of subject, but Kevin straightened up, perhaps sensing where I was going with this. "Of course I remember," she said. "Do you remember how you planned their entire engagement party without asking them what they wanted?" Kevin nodded slowly. "She booked the country club, ordered the flowers, even chose the menu." "I wanted it to be special," Patricia said defensively. "I wanted everything to be perfect for you both." "But it wasn't what we wanted," Kevin said quietly. "We wanted something small, just family. We wanted to have it at Dad's house, maybe barbecue in the backyard." "Your father's backyard wasn't suitable for entertaining," Patricia replied automatically. "The patio was cracked, and there wasn't adequate seating, and what if it rained?" I watched this exchange and felt pieces clicking into place. "This is the same thing," I said. "This exact same pattern. You see a situation that doesn't meet your standards, and you fix it according to what you think is best, without considering that maybe the people involved are okay with cracked patios and junk mail and houses that need foundation work." Patricia's face was flushing. "I don't understand why wanting things to be nice is such a terrible thing." "It's not terrible," I said, and I meant it, "but it's not your choice to make." Kevin was looking at his mother with an expression I couldn't quite read. "Mom, do you remember what you said when Sarah and I told you we wanted to elope instead of having the big wedding you'd started planning?" That was different, Patricia said quickly. You said we were being ungrateful. You said you'd put so much work into making everything beautiful, and we were throwing it all away. Because I had put work into it, Patricia said, her voice rising slightly. I spent weeks coordinating with vendors, choosing flowers that would complement Sarah's coloring, finding a venue that would photograph well. And you wanted to just run off to City Hall. The hurt in her voice was real, and I found myself feeling an unexpected pang of sympathy. But Kevin pressed on. We were grateful for the effort, Mom. But it was our wedding. It should have been our choice. Fine, Patricia said, standing up abruptly. I see how this is going to go. Everything I've ever done to try to make life better for this family is now going to be reframed as some kind of controlling manipulation. The room went silent. Patricia was breathing hard, and I could see tears forming in her eyes. That's not what we're doing, I said carefully. But Patricia, you have to understand that good intentions don't automatically make your actions okay. She turned to look at me, and for the first time since I'd known her, she looked genuinely vulnerable. I don't know how else to be, she said simply. When I see things that are wrong, or inefficient, or unnecessarily difficult, I fix them. That's who I am. Kevin moved to stand beside his mother. But Mom, sometimes things that look wrong to you aren't actually wrong. They're just different from how you would do them. Like Dad living with his books piled on tables instead of organized on shelves, I added. That looked wrong to you, but it was right for him. Patricia sat back down heavily. He could never find anything in those piles. But he could, I said gently. He knew exactly where everything was. His system made sense to him, even if it didn't make sense to you. We sat with that for a moment. Patricia was staring at her hands, and I found myself thinking about all the ways she'd tried to help over the years, all the problems she'd solved that I'd never even known existed. The birthday parties she'd organized for Kevin when he was too busy with work to plan them himself. The time she'd had my gutters cleaned and repaired while I was out of town, because she'd noticed they were pulling away from the house. The way she'd quietly handled most of the logistics when my father had been hospitalized 2 years ago, coordinating with doctors and making sure someone was always there to advocate for him. Patricia, I said finally, I want you to call the real estate agent and cancel whatever you've set up. She nodded reluctantly. And I want all of Dad's mail tonight. Another nod. But I also want you to know that I understand you were trying to help, and I know that a lot of the time, your help has been genuinely helpful. She looked up at me, hope flickering in her expression. But from now on, I continued, I need you to ask before you help. Even if you think the answer will be yes. Even if you think you know what's best. I need you to ask. Kevin was nodding. That's all we've ever wanted, Mom. Just to be asked. Patricia was quiet for a long moment. What if I ask, and you say no? Then we say no, I replied. And you have to be okay with that. Even if I think you're making a mistake? Even then. She took a shaky breath. That's going to be very hard for me. I know, Kevin said gently, but it's important. Patricia picked up her phone and stared at it for a moment. I'll call the agent now. As she dialed, I felt some of the tension in my chest begin to ease. We still had to deal with the mail situation, and I still needed to go through my father's house properly, on my own terms. But for the first time all day, I felt like I might actually be able to do that without interference.